Hi folks, we're back again with our Antec build, and this time we're going to be putting a CPU hardline water loop inside. We're going to be using all these alpha-cool parts that they provided to be able to get some nice cooling for the CPU. We're going to be putting a 360mm radiator in the front. I'm going to be walking you through how you plan the loop, how you sort of install the various parts, and how you can do quite a simple but a very effective cooling solution with minimal modding. So let's go take a look at the parts and see how you do it. So parts-wise, we're going to start with an XT45 radiator. We've got the nickel-plated version, which is going to be going in the front. That should nicely match the motherboard, along with all the RGB lighting. We're going to be using the Eiswasser coolant, which will be a pastel white. That's going to go with the satin tubing, the Eisroher, which will mean that the actual colour will go right to the edge, and it'll have like a nice soft look to the outside of the tubes. It's the same ones that we've used in our 1000D project, and we really like the look. We're also going to be using the alpha-cool fittings. So in this case, we've got a whole batch of what the hell? Isaphen. So we've got Isaphen acrylic compression fittings, which are going to be holding the whole thing together. And we're going to be using an Eisbecker reservoir pump combo, which is going to be fed with a Lang DDC 1T pump. And it's PWM control. So you can control it from the motherboard, which is great because when they're going at full whack, they're quite loud. If you want to turn it down, it makes it much quieter. And they're way overspec'd for most PC builds, especially a small one like one of these. For the CPU block, we've gone with the alpha-cool ice block. They've got two versions. We've got a clear or a frosted one. We're going to decide which one we think fits better during the actual build process. So these are the components that are going to be going into the build itself. Let's have a look at how you plan it and where we're going to be putting all the various parts. Yeah. Whoa!
You were going, son.
So one of the things to consider with a chassis like this is that space is quite a premium. And we've got quite a large radiator going, so we've got a 360mm radiator. We're going to be putting that in the front. We've got more clearance on the front than the top, because if you put it in the top, you can sometimes hit the actual motherboard itself. So it's probably wiser to do it in the front. Plus we've got a nice cutout here in the power supply shroud. So putting this in the front here, I'm going to put the ports facing the top rather than the bottom, because it's going to be much easier to get the tubes to go to the CPU and to the pump and reservoir, versus down here where you may have to drill pass-through fittings or other similar kind of solutions because there's not a huge amount of clearance on the front. Other things worth considering, this is a pump res mount. So what happens is you have a pump like this one, this is a DDC. You take the stock housing off, put it onto the bottom, and that has an entire unit. They're quite neat, and it makes a lot of sense in a space like this because you haven't got loads of room for extra fittings and extra tubing runs. The other thing though, is that you have to think about how the coolant is going to come out of the PC when you want to change it. So there are a few different options. On the Eisbecker, you do have an extra port around the back. The only problem is this is more like an inflow port. It's actually raised, so it might not be easy to see, but it's raised above the level of the pump and also above the outflow of the pump. So mostly water pressure will push it out of there, but instead we're going to use that as the inflow, and that's going to be going on around the back, using a fitting like this. So we've got an elbow fitting with an extender. This extender comes with here because the actual port is recessed for aesthetic reasons. So you're going to need to use an extender just to make sure that the fitting goes all the way to the bottom and doesn't leak. We're going to be putting that one into there. We're going to be mounting using these stock brackets onto the radiator itself, with having the tube likely coming from the CPU directly down here or to the radiator itself. We'll decide which one works better during the course of the build. Okay, we're going to take them to the belt sander. So we've got the majority of the hardware installed now. I haven't put the graphics card in yet because it makes it easier to access some of the rear fittings over here. And we're not water cooling it anyway, so it's not really part of the runs. I'll probably put it in just to make sure that we don't have any conflicts between some of these tubes. But I'm going to give you a rundown of where we're going to be going and how I'm going to do it. Also, card here for our video on how to plan a hardline water loop. So, starting with the simple one, we're going to have a run coming out of this port, which is going to go out, vertical, turn left, and then go into the bottom port of the CPU block here. From there, we'll go from the CPU block out, and it's going to go into the radiator. And the final radiator port, which is on this one over here, is going to go down here into that port which we mentioned earlier in the video. I've put a rotary snake fitting on there to give it a bit more leeway because it doesn't quite line up. So using the snake allows me to change the angle and the distance between the two ports. It'll make it a bit easier to line it all up properly. So let's get to actual planning. So we're putting in two 90-degree rotary fittings. The first one is going to be going facing down, and that's going to become our drain port. The tube will come down here, along here to a tap fitting. The other one is going to be going up towards the CPU. We could bend this, but the issue is there's not a huge amount of clearance between the front of the reservoir here and the glass pane that's going to be sitting in front of the case. So by using the fittings, we can get a nice tight bend, and we don't have to worry about putting any stress on the tubes. For the drain system, I'm using a male-female adapter, which extends the fitting over here. That gives it more clearance with the fitting next to it. And then I'm using another 90-degree rotary to attach it to a male-male fitting, because you need a male-male fitting to be able to attach into the female thread of the tap fitting. If you had a male-male rotary, you'd be able to have it go all the way around. I didn't have one for this particular build though. Right, so we've got all the tubes bent now. It's time to put them inside the rig. Now, we've used a couple rotary snakes over here because we found that actually, because the ports are quite close to one another, we weren't quite getting enough clearance with just a single rotary or a direct fitting. So we've used a snake on the top and a snake on the bottom, which has helped direct everything and should keep it looking nice and consistent. And also means you can take your drain port and you can flick it out like that. So that's going to be quite good. But for meanwhile, it sits in like that. Now let's get these tubes prepped. First thing you're going to want to do is going to make sure the collars are on your tubes. So that's what we're going to do now. Now, in theory, that should all be fully sealed up. Let's see what happens. Yeah, I think that's, I think we're safe. So we've now got all the tubes plumbed into the system. We're at that crucial point where it's time to leak test it. Well, The first way that we tried is we did a pressure test. So that basically pumps it with air instead. And then if the pressure doesn't reduce over time, then it should in theory be leak-free. But it's not quite the same as doing it with coolant. So let's hope for the best. I'm going to put it in and see how it goes. So to leak test your system, there are a few things you have to follow. So firstly, you want to make sure that all the plugs are out of your hardware, because you don't want to have anything live whilst you're testing. Second thing is you're going to need to have one of these handy devices called a bridging plug. It's actually just an extension which is a wire that goes between the 4th and 5th pins on the PSU side. So you can actually do without this if you wish. You can use a paperclip. We do have an article for that on BitTech. So I'm going to be using one of these because it's a bit quicker and easier to plug in and out. So now you need to plug one of these into the 24 pin on the motherboard. What that does is it bridges the power supply because it won't switch on otherwise without the motherboard being connected. Now you're able to switch the power supply on, which will power the pump which is connected around the back. Next step, you need to be prepared. So we've got this kitchen roll. Now it's not 100% necessary, you can go without it, but one of the handy things about kitchen rolls, not only does it obviously mop up any potential leaks when you put it between your components, it does make it a little bit easier to spot things. Now we're using white coolant, so it's not necessarily going to be easy on that front, but if you're using a coloured one like red or blue, it will show up very, very visibly against the white paper. So what you want to do with this, you want to wrap it in and around all your crucial parts. So I'm going to put some here above the GPU. I'm also going to put some underneath the pump, and then if you wish, you can also wrap it literally around the fittings. You don't always need to do this, but if you wish to, you can put it around the CPU socket, much like so. And that will mean if there are any drips or any other kind of larger leaks, maybe from a fitting being at an off angle or a thread not being fully inserted, it should be able to catch the coolant. You can switch it off, drain the system, and then tighten everything and get going again. So with the paper towels in place, I highly suggest getting one of these things for the actual filling. A fill bottle. You can buy them online quite cheaply. I got this one for a kit. This way you can put your coolant in here and you can use the nice long flexible nozzle to go into the top of the reservoir and squeeze. So let's put the pastel white into the fill bottle, pop it into the system and hope that it doesn't leak. So we put the coolant into the reservoir. Now it's time to cycle the pump and get it going. Now you've got to make sure that the pump never runs dry. The pumps are lubricated by the fluid going through them, so if it runs dry, they stand a huge chance of overheating and getting damaged very quickly. So the way we do this, because it's bridged, you just use the on switch at the back of the power supply, and it should cycle through. So the loop's now filled and we're in the bleeding stage. So at this point, air is going to be passing through the loop. There'll be air from the radiators, from the water blocks, and generally from the tubes and things. That's going to be pushed out, and over time it's going to come out through the reservoir. Now that means your water level is going to go down over time, so you want to keep it topping it up every so often. It can take anywhere from half an hour to maybe several hours if you've got more complex loop or a slightly different arrangement. So at the same time, don't be too worried. If your pump is quite loud at the start, you may be able to hear the one from this system, because a lot of that is down to the air. As the air goes through the pump, it really creates quite a rattling sound. So as the air bleeds out of the loop and your loop becomes kind of clearer, you'll find that the pump noise will also reduce heavily. You're also going to be able, once it's finished kind of doing through this and you've finished cycling the pump, you'll be able to control the speed of the pump better as well, because you don't really need to be running it at max speed. Say if I'm using a D5 pump or a DDC like this one, I'll usually run them between 30 and 40%, which makes them almost inaudible, but only once all the air's gone. So you can maybe cycle the speeds to help get rid of the air. It's a similar sort of thing to switching the power supply on and off. So that's one way to hasten the process. Another way is you can sort of take the system and tilt it, maybe give it a few light shakes here and there. Obviously be careful that you don't dislodge any of the tubes, but anything just to help the air get out of the system into the reservoir will be fine. So with a basic loop now done, what about thinking about the future? Well, we might be able to do, say, parts of the GPU loop if we've got a universal block that fits. We're going to experiment with that. Another option is I want to be able to maybe put some distro plates in there, have the tubing route through the bottom or through the top or the front. maybe some custom paint work. I'd like to make some metal panels so that we can match up the radiator, which is this lovely nickel and chrome finish. So I'd like to have that maybe in more parts of the build, especially since we've got a nice silver motherboard as well. So it makes sort of sense to try and tie them all together. Maybe some other elements like a GPU backplate I think would fit quite well. And we're going to see how far we can take this little case. So you make it something really quite unique and show that you don't need some great big monstrous case just to do something really special. So that should give you a rough overview of what to expect. So see you in part 3.